August 1945, Oklahoma dust. A convoy stops at an American POW camp. The guards expect battle-hardened men. Instead, 40 starving German women step down, uniforms hanging off bones, eyes hollow from years without real food. One teenage girl dares to ask the impossible in broken English. Can we have the leftovers? What happened next with ice-cold Coca-Cola bottles and warm hamburgers became one of the quietest, most powerful moments of mercy at the end of the war. Nobody ever put in the history books. Until summer 1945, thousands of German prisoners, men and women, were held in camps across the United States, fed better than many American civilians because the Geneva Convention demanded it, and because America could. But rules on paper are one thing, humanity in person is another. Tonight you're going to hear the true story of Camp Tonkawa, Oklahoma, where a single question from a hungry 18-year-old girl cracked open hearts on both sides of the wire. Welcome to my channel, and this is the story nobody was supposed to remember, yet nobody who was there ever forgot. If you stay until the end, you'll discover what arrived in the mail in 1953 that still brings tears 70 years later. Hit that like button right now so this story reaches more people, and let's begin. The sun was bleeding orange across the Oklahoma plain when the convoy finally rolled through the gates of Camp Tonkawa on August 17, 1945. Private Eddie Reyes, 19 years old, San Antonio born and raised, leaned against his moan and tried to look bored the way seasoned guards do. He had been on the line since February, herding surly Wehrmacht veterans who stared straight ahead like they were still on parade. But the figures climbing down from the canvas-back deuces now were nothing like those men. Women, 40 of them. Luftwaffe-Nachrichtenhelferinnen, signal auxiliaries rounded up in Normandy after their units surrendered en masse the previous summer. Because British camps were bursting, Washington decided the Atlantic was wide enough to ship them here, to the flat, furnace-hot. Their once crisp gray-blue uniforms hung like sacks on scarecrows. Waists had shrunk so much that some girls had knotted signal cord around their middles to keep trousers from sliding down bony hips. Boots, once mirror-polished for inspections on the Atlantic wall, were cracked and split, soles flapping like tired tongues. Cheekbones cut sharp shadows across faces burned brown by French sun, and then bleached pale again on troopships. Lips colorless from years of acorn coffee, chicory, and whatever the field kitchens could scrape together when the supply lines collapsed. At the front, though nobody had appointed her, walked Hannelore Mueller, 26, Berliner, former radio operator, call sign Alora, on the night nets outside Keene. She still moved like someone who had once worn headphones for 12-hour shifts while bombs walked closer. In a small cloth bundle tied with string, she carried the ruins of her life. One creased photograph of her parents standing in front of a house that no longer existed, a cracked tube of pre-war lipstick she hadn't opened in 2 years, and a plain gold wedding ring she had slipped off months ago because her fingers had grown too thin to hold it. Beside her, clutching the sleeve of Laura's jacket, was Kef Becker, barely 18, freckles still stubbornly clinging to her nose, despite everything. Her eyes were too large now for her face, the eyes of a child who had watched Keene burn from a cellar window. Trailing a step behind came Margaret Klein, 42, former Army nurse, shoulders permanently stooped from carrying boys with their legs blown off, and from carrying secrets heavier than stretchers. The American guards didn't know where to put their eyes. One corporal from Kansas whispered, "Ah, Jesus, they look like my kid's sister after the flu." Another spat tobacco juice and muttered something about a Hitler's secretaries, but the words died in the heat. Eddie felt a twist low in his gut. His abuela's voice drifted up from childhood Sunday dinners. Hunger has no uniform, Mafo. He shoved the thought down hard. He was on duty. Processing dragged on for 2 dusty hours. Names shouted, ranks recorded, fingerprints rolled in sticky black ink, delousing showers that stank of kerosene and shame. By the time the women shuffled into the mess hall, the sun had surrendered to a bruised purple sky and the big ceiling fans were fighting a losing battle against the day's stored heat. Then the smell hit them. Real beef stew. Potatoes. Carrots. 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 Onions floating in thick brown gravy you could stand a spoon in. For 3 years, most of these women had survived on sawdust bread, boiled nettles, and hope measured in grams. Meat had become a rumor told around dying stoves. They lined up in silence, metal trays trembling in thin hands. The servers, colored soldiers from the 322nd Quartermaster, ladled generous portions without a word. Laura stared at her bowl as if waiting for it to vanish, then breathed so quietly only Keth heard, and Enkshern. They sat on long benches, 40 women, backs ramrod straight from old habit, eating at first with tiny, suspicious spoonfuls, tasting, waiting for the trick. There was no spoons moved faster, bowls emptied. Some tilted them to drink the last gravy like soup. R.I.P. scraped hers so hard the tin screamed. The women sat frozen, eyes fixed on empty trays, pride wrestling with the animal need in their stomachs. Kuffa looked left, right, half rose, then sank again, cheeks flaming, cheeks flaming. Laura placed a steadying hand on the girl's wrist. Across the aisle, Eddie watched, throat tight. He had seen grown men beg. He had never seen women fight this hard not to. The mess sergeant, a barrel-chested Texan everyone called Pop Martinez, started stacking trays. Kiva's hand shot up before she could stop it. Her voice came out small, careful, rehearsed from flickering Hollywood movies back when movies still played in Germany. Can we have the leftovers, please? 40 German women held their breath. 40 American soldiers forgot how to move. The only sound was the big wall clock ticking like a bomb about to remember it was alive. 4 seconds of silence felt like 4 years. The mess hall clock kept ticking, each click a hammer on an anvil. Pop Martinez, arms folded across his apron, raised one thick eyebrow at Edie raise. Eddie felt every eye in the room settle on him like burning spotlights. His training manual said in black and white, no special treatment, no extra rations, no fraternization. Zebuela's voice, warm with Sunday morning cafe de ala, whispered something older than any manual. Hunger has no uniform, Majo. He swallowed once and gave Pop the smallest nod. Pop disappeared through the swinging kitchen door without a word. The women didn't dare hope. Kess' face flushed crimson. She stared at the scuffed floorboards, wishing they would open and swallow her whole. Laura reached over and squeezed the girl's hand once, hard, the way an older sister steadies a frightened child. 30 seconds stretched into eternity, and the door swung again, and Pop Martinez came back carrying a wooden Coca-Cola crate that sang with the music of ice and glass. He set it down in the middle of the nearest table with a soft clunk that sounded like the war ending all over again. Condensation ran down the green bottles in shining rivers, pooling on the wood like tears of pure joy. Behind him, Eddie followed, balancing a tray stacked high with wax paper-wrapped hamburgers still hot from the grill, grease blooming through the paper in perfect dark circles. 40 women stared as if the Ark of the Covenant had just been delivered by 2 shy kids from Texas. Coca-Cola was legend in Germany. Propaganda posters of smiling American GIs handing bottles to blonde children, while silver bombers flew overhead, radio voices promising a sweet life after victory. Most of these women had never tasted it, never believed it was real. Laura moved first because someone had to break the spell. She lifted a bottle with both careful hands, cradling it like fragile crystal, studying the white script on the glass as if it were ancient Latin. Eddie stepped forward, fishing the church key opener from his pocket. He hooked the cap, twisted. What of that? Phew, the mess hall sharp and brace cracked through the mess hall sharp and bright. The first shot of peace anyone in that room had heard in years. Laura brought the bottle to her lips, took the smallest possible sip, and her eyes flew open wide. A single tear cut a clean line through the dust on her cheek. She laughed and cried at the same time, one soft broken sound that carried every bombed-out night, every hungry dawn. A man got ease schmecked why Flusage's parodies. That broke the dam. Bottle caps popped like tiny fireworks across the tables. Hamburgers disappeared into trembling hands. One girl bit into hers and actually moaned out loud, then slapped a palm over her mouth. Eyes wide with embarrassment and pure bliss. Margaros Klein, the older nurse, stood without thinking, walked straight to Eddie, wrapped her thin arms around his neck and hugged him once. Hard the way a mother hugs a son she thought she had buried. Then she sat down fast before any officer could bark, cheeks flushed, eyes shining. Eddie stood frozen, arms floating useless at his sides, cheeks burning darker than the Texas sun ever managed. Pop Martinez leaned in the doorway, grinning like Santa Claus, who had showed up 8 months early. Across the room, even the sternest sergeant suddenly found something fascinating on the ceiling, or developed an urgent need to rub at their eyes. The women ate slowly now, reverently, tearing hamburgers into careful pieces, licking grease from fingers they'd once kept spotless for the Führer. Someone started giggling, high, shocked, uncontrollable. The sound spread like wildfire, until half the tables were laughing through tears, German and English mixing in the same breathless rush of disbelief. When the last drop was drunk and the last crumb chased across wax paper, Ketha did something no one expected. She climbed onto the bench, raised her empty bottle high like a torch and shouted in her schoolgirl English, voice cracking with joy, "Adieu, America." 40 green bottles rose in perfect answer. 40 American soldiers raised invisible ones back. For one impossible minute, the mess hall wasn't a prison. It was the safest, sweetest place on Earth. Word travels faster than any regulation ever written in any army camp on Earth. By the time the bugle blew Rive the next morning, every last GI at Camp Tonkawa knew the full story of the night the German girls got ice-cold Coca-Cola and real hamburgers. In the chow line, men retold it in hushed, half-laughing voices, passing it along like contraband cigarettes. Some slapped Eddie on the back and called him Saint Reyes of San Antonio. Others muttered darkly about fraternization, about a coddling Nazis, about rules being rules. Most simply felt something shift inside the wire, something quiet, unstoppable, and a little frightening because it had no name and no place in the training manuals. Lieutenant Harlan Brooks, West Point 1939, spine ramrod straight, face carved from the same oak as his clipboard, did not feel warm fuzzies. At noon formation, he marched into the mess hall like an avenging angel hunting for sin, boots striking the pine floor, hard enough to rattle spoons. Why? His eyes were winter steel cold, extra rations discontinued effective immediately. He barked, voice slicing clean through the clatter of trays and the smell of boiled cabbage. Any man caught distributing unauthorized food will answer to me personally. Pop Martinez, sleeves rolled high over tattooed forearms, kept ladling beef stew as if the lieutenant were speaking ancient Greek to the walls. Eddie Reyes felt his stomach drop straight through the floorboards and keep falling until it hit the red Oklahoma clay 20 feet below. That evening, the women lined up for supper quieter than mourners at a funeral. Shoulders that had begun to loosen the night before were rounded again, chins tucked, eyes lowered to the dust. Keth Becker's freckles stood out like cinnamon on milk, gone pale with dread. Laura Muller's jaw was clenched so tight, Eddie could see the small muscle jumping beneath the skin, the way it jumps when a person is holding back an ocean with nothing but teeth. Ew. Pop Martinez glanced once at Lieutenant Brooks standing ramrod by the door, once at the 40 frightened women, once at the wooden crate of Coca-Cola he had buried in ice before sunrise because some things are more important than orders. He shrugged the shrug of a man who had seen Guadalcanal and decided some battles were worth picking. He reached into the crate and started passing bottles down the line anyway. Condensation dripping like slow, deliberate applause onto the serving counter. Brooks opened his mouth to roar, veins bulging at his temples. Captain Tom Wheeler, camp commander, appeared in the doorway as if the tension itself had summoned him from headquarters. He was a quiet Missourian with kind eyes, and a voice that could calm a riot without ever rising above conversation. He had buried too many boys in too many places to waste breath on shouting. "Lieutenant," he said calmly, the words carrying clear across the hall without effort. "The Geneva Convention says we feed them properly and humanely. It does not say we have to be assholes about it." Brooks went purple from collar to hairline, saluted so hard his clipboard cracked against his thigh like a rifle shot, spun on his heel, and marched out without another syllable. 40 German women exhaled as one living creature, sound soft, and shaky, and grateful. From that night forward, Coca-Cola became the unofficial currency of peace inside the wire. The Camp PX began selling bottles to the women at cost, 2 cents each, payable in the script they earned folding laundry or peeling potatoes. Boo! Empty bottles lined every barracks windowsill, catching the brutal Oklahoma sunlight like green stained glass in a cathedral nobody had bombed. Girls polished them nightly with precious scraps of salvaged cloth until they shone brighter than parade boots ever had back in France. Evenings after chow, when the heat finally broke, some of the women drifted to the dusty ball field behind the motor pool. Edie taught them baseball using a broom handle for a bat and a ball wound tight with black friction tape stolen from the signal corps. Laura had a wicked swing, learned fast, and when she missed by a mile she laughed, a real head-back, throat open to the sky laugh that made Eddie forget for whole minutes that a war had ever existed. In return, she taught him German curse words so colorful and creative, he pretended shock while secretly scribbling them phonetic on the inside of his sleeve, with a stub carpenter's pencil. Small, stubborn rituals grew like wildflowers punching through concrete. One day, peanut butter appeared on the menu, thick and tan and mysterious. The women stared at it the way medieval peasants stared at alchemy. Eddie spread it thick on soft white bread, added grape jelly until it oozed purple, folded it over, and handed pieces around like communion wafers. Ketha took one bite, eyes rolled back in pure ecstasy, and declared in breathless awe, "A besser als Schokolade, better than chocolate." They started clearing tables without being asked, stacking trays with the same crisp military precision that once saved lives on blood-soaked operating tables, and made even Pop Martinez crack a rare, crooked grin. Every shared bottle, Every borrowed baseball glove, every accidental laugh was another brick pulled from the invisible wall between victor and vanquished. Every small act of stubborn kindness drove another crack through the lie that these women were still the enemy. They still wore the same gray-blue uniforms that had once helped bomb London and Warsaw to rubble. But hunger and mercy have a way of stripping cloth down to skin and skin down to soul, until only people remain. September 1945 arrived on a hot wind carrying rumors thicker than dust. Repatriation lists were being typed, ships were fueling in New York, the women would soon be sent home to a Germany that no longer existed. The knowledge settled over the camp like early frost. Conversations grew softer, jokes died halfway. Eyes lingered longer. The last evening meal felt different, heavier like a wake for something no one dared name aloud. Stew was eaten in near silence. Spoons scraped slower. Even the ceiling fans seemed to turn with reluctance. When the trays were empty, the women did not stand to leave. They stayed seated, 40 pairs of hands folded on the tables as though waiting for a verdict. Laura leaned close to Margaret, then whispered something too low for the guards to catch. Margaret nodded once, slipped out the side door, returned moments later, carrying one single hamburger on a tin army plate. She had saved it from her own ration, warmed it in the kitchen, and with a table knife carefully cut it into 8 equal pieces. Perfect, soldier, straight portions. She walked straight to the guard's table where Eddie sat with Pop Martinez and 3 others who had become quiet regulars at these evening meals. Marguerite stopped in front of Eddie, held the plate out at chest height. No words, just the offering. Accepting food from prisoners violated every regulation in the thick green book. Refusing would violate something older and far larger. Eddie looked at the small pieces of hamburger, then up into Margaret's eyes, then across the room to Laura, who watched without blinking. He reached out, took the first piece, and bit slowly, deliberately, eyes never leaving Laura's. Pop took the second. The other guards followed until the plate was clean. 8 small bites that tasted like bread, beef, and forgiveness. When the last crumb was gone, Laura stood. She walked the few steps to the guard's table, stopped in front of Eddie, and spoke in English she had practiced for weeks, careful and clear as cut glass. "Thank you for seeing us." 4 words, that was all. But in the hush, they sounded like a cathedral bell. That night, Eddie walked the perimeter wire alone under a sky so thick with stars it felt close enough to touch. He passed the women's barracks and paused. Through the open windows, he saw them. 40 green Coca-Cola bottles glowing softly on every windowsill, lined up like tiny lanterns holding back the dark. Some had wildflowers already tucked inside. Prairie daisies and late black-eyed Susans the women had gathered on supervised walks. A sight caught in his throat and stayed there. 8 years later, spring 1953, Munich, a small package arrived at a rebuilt third-floor apartment on Lindwurmstrasse. No return address, only a San Antonio postmark. Inside, wrapped in brown paper and cotton, one original 1945 Contour Coca-Cola bottle, still perfect, not a chip or crack, and a single folded sheet of plain notepaper. The note was written in careful block letters. "I never forgot the night we shared leftovers. I still think about it when the Texas heat feels like Oklahoma. Hope this finds you well and that life has been kind. Your friend always, Eddie Ray's San Antonio. Texas, Hannelore Mueller, now 34. Hair beginning to silver at the temples, working as a typist in a rebuilt insurance office, stood at her kitchen window holding the bottle to the light. She turned it slowly, watching the afternoon sun fracture into green shards across the wall. Then she filled it with the first alpine wildflowers of the season and placed it on her own windowsill, where it would stay for the rest of her life. She never married again. She never threw the note away. Every spring she replaced the flowers. Every Christmas she told her daughter Lena the story, the same way, word for word, until the girl could recite it by heart. That the war ended twice for her mother. Once with surrender in a Normandy orchard, once with a cold, sweet drink in an Oklahoma mess hall, and the courage of an 18-year-old girl who dared to ask for more. The bottle is still there today, on a shelf in a small house outside Munich. Wildflowers long faded, but the glass still shining, still holding the light of a night when enemies became people again. One shared hamburger, and one green bottle at a time. Some victories are loud, measured in miles of territory and surrendered flags. Some are quiet, measured in bubbles rising in green glass and the sound of a bottle cap opening like hope itself. In the summer of 1945, in a dusty corner of Oklahoma, 40 hungry German women and a handful of American boys discovered that Mercy sometimes wears a simple uniform and speaks with a Texas accent. That was the night. The leftovers became legend. If this story moved you the way it still moves me, smash that like button right now It takes half a second and tells YouTube to show this to more people who need to remember humanity wins in the end. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever seen kindness change everything in a single moment? Subscribe and hit the bell because part 2 is already filmed. When Lena, Laura's daughter, finally traveled to Texas to return something that was never really hers to keep. You won't want to miss what happened when she knocked on Eddie's door 58 years later. See you in the next one. And remember, sometimes all it takes is one cold Coca-Cola and the courage to ask.